It's your official voice note incoming from the Mediocre Black Woman Podcast. Ew. I feel like I haven't done a voice note in a while. So I was like, let me do a voice note for y'all because I have a few thoughts that are not fully related. So I was like, a voice note sounds like the perfect space for this. So before we get into some of that, I just want to start with this first thought. So I went back and re-listened to Thursday's episode where I talked about being laid off. And for y'all's edification, I don't always listen fully through the episodes while I'm editing them. I do more of a spot test of portions of the episode because I like the episodes to feel like I don't like to over edit. I'm not one of those people. Like I don't like mine to be like choppy and over edited or like I don't know. It's just I want it to sound like me in real time. One of my podcast mentors told me a story about how one of his podcasters had been so good at editing their episodes down. Like that's what they were really good at. So when they got an opportunity to interview for a live spot, the people who were interested in having them were not impressed by the live interview that they did because the test interview, because of the fact that they didn't speak the way that their podcast was portrayed. So that means if anybody reaches out to me for speaking engagements or they want me to come and, do something for them, they're already getting a little bit of a taste of, Theodora. Obviously, I clean it up in different areas. You go from a little bit more corporate or a little bit more polished to this podcast is just me as I am for the most part and very raw. Sometimes there's times where I gotta pivot a little bit depending on the subject, but for the most part you're getting like the more of the intimate version of how I would have a conversation, right? But that's important to me, so that's why I don't over edit my podcast. I just spot test different spaces, but usually I go back and listen to them when they actually come out. So when y'all are getting them and listening to them, that's when I know I'm experiencing it by being the one recording it, but it's not the same. So when I go back and listen, I feel like I'm getting the experience real time like you all are, if that makes sense. So anyway, I went back and re-listened to Thursday's episode. I was on a high on Thursday too. So much going on. But at one point I said that Neptune is the planet of expansion, and that's not exactly accurate, nor was it the thought that I was actually trying to fully convey. But if you've been here a while, you probably caught what was happening in real time. I got excited and I started making a connection in my head, and then my mouth took a slightly different path and I didn't loop back to fully complete the thought and the concept that I was trying to get to in that episode. So that's something I've really noticed about how my brain works. I'll think something through internally and think I've said it or even think I've done it. And then I'll move so fast between ideas that I forget to finish one before jumping to the next. So yeah, it shows up in small everyday ways too. Well, small, not so small because it can be a waste sometimes. But like I have a Post-it on my microwave that literally says, don't forget to turn off the oven. Because yes, I have absolutely gone outside, run errands, and come back to realize the oven was still on. Not once, but multiple times, y'all. And same, oh my God, with laundry. So for the past 4 days, I finally got it together as of yesterday, but for the past 4 days, I have been washing the same load of clothes because I kept forgetting to move it to the dryer. And then when I remember, I'm like, damn it, I need to wash it again so I'm not wearing sour clothes or the clothes don't become sour. And so I have to start it all over again. So this is real life over here. This is how this is how my brain is. And I fight through that often of not feeling like I'm able to fully complete my thoughts. So I do have to have some notes or some bullet points to help at times. So thank y'all for your grace in those moments. I'm learning to give myself that grace a lot more often too. Not just for what I forget, but the way I process the world. Like it's not broken. It's just my brain processes in a very non-linear way, which is also what makes me very creative and makes my creative process so fun and unique. It's just how I think about things and the way my mind moves and makes connections to different things. But the challenge is that I sometimes have to work a little harder to bring all the tabs in my brain into focus, where they need to be. So anyway, let's talk about what I actually meant. So in my 10th house of Capricorn, right? 10th house is the house of career, legacy, and visibility. I've got Neptune, Uranus, and the sun. Let's start with Neptune. So while it's not the planet of expansion in the Jupiter sense, it is the planet of dreams, spirituality, and the subconscious. It rules Pisces, and its energy is around it's around intuition. It's intuitive. It's kind of hard to pin down. Neptune expands not by pushing outward, but by dissolving boundaries between self and spirit, between logic and vision, between what's real and idealized. So it governs the collective unconsciousness, our imagination, our compassion, and our desire to connect with something larger than ourselves. So at its best, it inspires. I'm not going to talk about what it's like at its worst because that is not the energy that this was bringing for me, I feel like, in this season of my life. So Uranus brings, or Uranus, depending on who you ask, Uranus brings expansion through disruption. Uranus is known as the planet of change, innovation, and rebellion, and it governs certain sudden shifts, unexpected events, and the urge for freedom and individuality, which you guys could hear expressed in how I was thinking about my role and what I really wanted to change, and I just couldn't seem to get it to change, right? It's also associated with Aquarius, the sign of the visionary and humanitarian, and it's often linked to progress and breaking free from outdated structures, right? Which is literally what was happening with my work. I think it's challenging me to think about my work in a very different way, you know? Um, and then the sun. The sun is considered like your core of your personality, your identity, and your life force. So to have the sun sitting in my 10th house of career means my career path isn't just about making money or climbing ladders. It's deeply tied to who I am at my core. So where I was talking about looking for the through line between my personal projects outside of work and my day-to-day work in my 9 to 5, it was like, that those were very important to me. Those are very important to me because of where this sun placement sits for me. It sits in a part of my house, a career house that is it's really tied to who I am, you know? So when all three of those planets live in my career house, it just makes sense that this shift, this layoff would feel bigger than just a job ending. And it happened on a Capricorn full moon, which you just can't make this shit up. And it's so funny. So hold on, let me pause here. Last year on the Capricorn full moon, I was in New Orleans and I was having a grand old time, y'all. Grand old time. I was in New Orleans on the Capricorn full moon in Cancer season, and I was enjoying myself. I met so many really dope people. I remember at one point I was like, probably, I think I was walking like, I think I walked about 7 miles in one night and didn't feel like it at all because I was just up and down, back and forth all over the place with different people, hanging out, having a good time. And then to think about this Capricorn full moon and what that brought, I was like, wow, the difference is like stark, you know? But I'm so grateful, honestly. But anyway, so it felt bigger than just a job ending, right? And even though these changes were unexpected, it helped me see bigger possibilities for myself, right? Paths that I hadn't considered because I felt like I was too deep in the structure of what I already knew and the comfort of that structure, right? So yeah, it was an expansion. I just didn't properly tie the thread back together for y'all. Like my brain jumped and was like, ooh, it's an expansion, planet of expansion. And I was like, wait, no, brain, come back, get back on the railroad tracks, bring it all back together. So that was my first thought of this voice note, okay? So now here's my second thought of this voice note. Totally similar vein, but different in how it's related, okay? So post me being laid off, I started remembering certain things from past roles, past managers. For some reason, like stuff just comes back when it does. But I've been thinking about something a former boss said to me once. When I first came to work for her, she gave me this interesting kind of welcome. She said, I'm giving you 2 weeks, just figure out what you want to do here. And part of it was actually that she wasn't supposed to be my manager, and at the last moment they made her my manager and switched my team. It was really weird, right? And I remember being like, huh? Like, it was just such a weird shift. But yeah, when she told me that, I was like, y'all don't have no onboarding, y'all don't have no, like, nothing about the roles, because there was roles like mine, but I just don't think she anticipated me being in the role. But yeah, I had barely learned where the bathroom was. I didn't know the systems, the dynamics, the department's actual priorities, nothing. And also, this wasn't one of those like glitzy kind of visionary departments, like where you're given all the creative freedom. It was a place where there was high priority things going on, and so there wasn't a lot of room for creativity in that work. And to be honest, that kind of work, in my opinion, creativity is always possible to an extent, but I think that there's just some things you just have to do a certain way. That just is what it is, and I know that. But I got to do a lot of strategy work, so that's where I got to use my creativity and challenge my brain in that way. But it's just not like the other kinds of work that I had ever done. It was like a little brief pivot in the type of work that I was doing, actually. So it was like a little 2-year stint where I changed up what I was working on. It was dope though, and always still working with leadership. That's just what I've always done. So anyway, it wasn't one of those departments where you're given all that creative freedom. Okay, blah, blah, blah. It was a place where folks made things work. But again, this wasn't a dream incubator, it just wasn't that vibe. So 2 weeks passed, right? And she comes back like, so you haven't figured it out? And I said, well, I've onboarded myself. I'm learning the role. Because let's be honest, I had to do my own onboarding, because she wasn't ready for me. Like, it was just a given, right? And then she says something that sat with me, but not for the reason that she probably intended or thought. But she was like, and I don't know if she was trying to call me this, but whatever. I didn't take the projection. I didn't take the bait. But she said, there was a time that I finally took off from work, and during that time I realized I was lazy. And I was like, And I remember staring at her like, damn, you really believe that about yourself? Or did the world teach you that, So here's the thought here. You're not lazy. You're just unpracticed at wanting, right? And so that conversation came rushing back to me this week after I got laid off. And while I personally didn't feel lazy, I did feel this strange mix of relief and disorientation, like something in my body finally unclenched, but my mind hadn't quite caught up to it yet. So there was like some silence, some stillness. And I realized this is the moment where so many of us start to spiral, because without something to do, we start questioning our worth. Not because we are lazy, but because we've been trained to see rest as emptiness, to see stillness as unproductive, to see I don't know what I want as failure instead of a beginning. So let me say it clearly for you, for me, for whoever needs to hear it, y'all. You're not lazy. You've just never been asked. And now that you are being asked, it might take a moment to answer. And that's not a flaw. That's an invitation, right? A lot of us have never had the luxury to be asked and to actually sit on that question and ruminate on it, because we have real fucking priorities. Like, let's keep it real. That's where we all struggle with the struggle between survival and between let me expand and hope for a future. That's why I said in Thursday's episode, I said, focus on your survival and get that out of the way. If you've been laid off and you have to work immediately because you need money and you got to, take care of yourself, get your survival out of the way, but don't stop dreaming and don't stop plotting. Don't let that job settle you back into that structure. And I'm not saying that not having a job and working for yourself is what I'm talking about. I'm saying just don't get settled into a job that doesn't suit you. Don't get settled into even self-employment work that doesn't suit you. Just because you're good at something doesn't mean that it's aligned in your passion, So that's what I mean by that. Not everybody's meant to have a business. Not everybody's meant to have a job. And shit, sometimes some people are meant to have both, right? There's a lot of reasons to do a lot of things. You just have to know what your reason is. Some people have a business and have a job because they want to offer their offerings for free. Like I had both because I was offering mine at a lower cost, at a lower rate. And now I'm revisiting that of like, is this something I would rather focus on full time, or do I want to figure out about having a job again so I can keep things at a lower price point? Or is there another way for me to take care of myself and still keep things at a lower price point for people? And, so it all just depends on what your focus is on and what your priorities are. But you have to know that and you have to get clear about that, right? But again, none of us have been asked. And it's because we live in a system that equates worth with output. Capitalism trains us to believe that our value is tied to what we can produce, perform, or perfect. So when you stop moving even for a second, you're not just resting, you're rebelling, right? And that's why when you take a break, even a well-earned one, your first feeling might not be peace. It might be guilt, because capitalism pathologizes the pause. It treats rest like laziness. It treats slowness like failure. It treats softness like weakness. But let's be clear, that's not divine truth. That's corporate conditioning, right? Especially for Black women. We've been made to believe that we have to earn rest, that we have to collapse before we can actually take a nap, that if we're not overachieving, we're underperforming. But I want to say this clearly. You're not lazy. You are recovering. Oh my God. What a revolutionary idea. Your brain and your body have to almost adjust. Your nervous system has to adjust to you being able to take a step back and breathe and ask, what do I want? That's new, So here I am, laid off with a clean house, a released breath, and a podcast mic in my face. And the real questions I'm sitting with is this: now that no one's telling me what to do, where to show up, what to be, what the priorities are, what the KPIs, look, I'm forgetting the corporate speak already, what the KPIs are, what the quarterly business review goals are, all that shit. What do I actually want to do? We say things like, if I ruled the world, if I ruled. But here's the truth. You already rule yours. You just might not be used to giving yourself permission to act like it. I had to clap my hands on that one. To act like it, okay? That question, what do I actually want, is so sacred. And maybe no one's ever asked you that, or maybe you've been too busy surviving to ask yourself. But today, I want to ask you to make a little room, a little space inside your mind, right? In the little boxes in your mind, the little tabs of your mind, in your body, in your day, to start dreaming, to start wondering, to start listening for what's yours, not what's been assigned to you, okay? You don't have to burn your life down to begin again. You don't have to quit, but you do deserve to know what it feels like to want something without guilt, to pause without shame, to imagine without apologizing for it. And when that moment comes, when you finally ask yourself, what do I actually want? I hope you listen gently, and I hope you let that be enough for now. So if you're listening to this and you've ever had a moment where rest feels like punishment and quiet feels like failure, I want you to hear me. You're not lazy. You've just never been asked. And now that you have, what would it feel like to answer that question with tenderness, with joy, with ease, without shame? You don't need to fill the space just to feel valid. Let this be your permission to pause, to not know, to wander, and to be worthy while doing so. So this week, y'all, your homework, I don't even like saying homework. I need to come up with a better word for that. Maybe I should say it in Spanish, your tarea. Anyway, your homework for this week is to give yourself permission to pause and make space to explore your hopes, your dreams, and your quiet desires. Let this be a moment of curiosity, not pressure. Okay, y'all, those are the breaks. That's all I got for you. Remember, this is a voice note, so we do it a little differently. I know some of y'all are new to the feed and you haven't heard a voice note just yet, possibly. So this is what the voice notes are all about. So do me a favor, y'all, because this is really important. I want you to, one, do your homework, but two, I want you to like this post if you're on Substack. I want you to comment on it if you're on Substack, because I want to hear how you're making space for your hopes, your dreams, and your desires. I want to hear about times where you're like, damn, this is really hard for me. And I feel all these shameful thoughts that are flooding into my mind. And we could talk about that, like, and how to shift that, because it all starts with the mind. And we actually have a guest next week on the podcast, which, we haven't done guests in a while, but we're going to be talking about that very subject: change your mind or change your mind. And then I want you to subscribe if you're on Substack. And if you're not on Substack, get on Substack, subscribe, comment, and like so you can be a part of the conversation. And then do me a favor and share this with a friend. Leave us a review. Let us know that this is resonating with you. And you guys, I actually look at people's comments. I mentioned maybe 2 episodes ago, I went through and listened to every single person's comment, or read every single person's comments, the DMs. I went on YouTube and looked at anything that maybe came up, or episodes that were higher than others, right? I really pay attention to this stuff because my goal is to also serve, right? Like, yes, I'm creating, but it's in service of us, right? That's why this space is here. So talk to me, because I talk back, whether it's through a divinely timed episode, or whether it's through a comment, or whether it's through a girl, yes, I see you, or maybe an offering that I might create. Somebody asked me to do a reading and now I have an offering for it. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, I'm paying attention to y'all. Okay. That's that. And I will see you guys on the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Have a beautiful and blessed day. Bye.